So welcome everyone to this webinar where we will present the findings of a study about non-mechanical recycling technologies of plastics. And Peter, you can switch the slides, please. So my name is Teresa Kjell, and with me today I have my colleague Dr. Jonathan Kleimark, and together we will walk you through the background, the reasons why we wanted to do this, the content of the study, as well as the conclusions. At the end, there will be time for some Q&A, so please note down any questions that you have in the Q&A box in Zoom, and we will do our best to answer them at the end. As usual, we will be recording this session and make it available afterwards together with the slides. You can switch the slides, please. Okay, I will start by talking briefly about our organization. We are an environmental NGO aiming to reduce the use of hazardous substances. By collaborating with companies, we highlight positive examples, we show what's possible. So we have discussions with policymakers trying to find regulatory solutions that benefit human health and the environment, while also working well for companies with ambitious chemicals management. We have a long-lasting collaboration with a large number of brands, but at the core of this collaboration is our ChemSec business group, consisting of companies like Apple, IKEA, Lego, H&M, and others. We get our funding from governments and foundations, so we don't charge companies. This is important so we can keep our independence. We provide free guidance for companies and advise investors with online tools such as the SIN list of chemicals fulfilling their criteria to be on the REACH candidate lists. So you can switch the slides, please. So today we will be talking about non-mechanical recycling. And to avoid confusion, I want to start by clarifying the concept, because there are many names being used for this variety of technologies, such as chemical recycling and advanced recycling. And we have chosen to use the term non-mechanical recycling to avoid confusion and misconceptions. And let me clarify this further by specifying what we include in this concept. So it is namely dissolution, depolymerization, and thermal methods like pyrolysis and gasification. And the different categories of non-mechanical recycling technologies, they are indeed very different, with very different levels of information, energy costs, potential for scale up, etc. So if you wish to learn more, there is more detailed information in the report and on our website. You can switch the slides, please. So now let me provide you with some background to why we decided to make this study. So it was a few years back, we started getting contacted by companies about non-mechanical recycling technologies. And the company representatives were confused and wondered if we had more information, as the guidance available, in particular a white paper made under the Ellen MacArthur Foundation umbrella, presented information that didn't correspond very well to the brand's requirements when they were looking to expand their use of recycled material. And as we all know, many brands are ambitious in their intention to use more recycled content, but they are not willing to lower the standards on, for example, hazardous chemical content. And mechanical recycling has huge challenges in this regard, and therefore it is natural to look for other sources like non-mechanical recycling. But for brands to assess these materials, if they are indeed a good option, there needs to be information on things like quality, environmental impact, and how much of the material that actually comes from waste. And the information available is in general insufficient or complicated. And when examining this in more detail, there seems to be a big difference between what the brands have as requirements and what the suppliers are providing. And I can switch slides, please. So our intention with the survey, it was to clarify what this situation looks like and hopefully make findings that can help policymakers, suppliers, and other stakeholders to improve the possibilities for a better match. So we sent out a digital survey and 26 brands answered it. We then had in-depth discussions with 10 well-known brands. You can see them on screen there, based on the questions in the survey to complement the findings with more qualitative information. We performed these interviews under Chatham House rules, so the answers that you will see in the report and in the presentation will not disclose what company said what. And with that, I will leave over to Jonathan to go through the questions and the findings.
Thank you very much, Teresa, for that nice introduction to the study and the report. So if we take the next slide, please. So I will go through, as Teresa said, more of the findings and the results of the report. And the most important, I would say the most important issues that were raised by the different brands, both in the survey and during the in-depth interviews. So the first of those topics that I would like to talk about is the lack of information. So as Teresa said, these technologies are fairly new and in many cases immature, especially when it comes to recycling of plastics. And as always, with new technologies, there are data gaps. And we identified 3 different topics that were identified from the brands as the most important data gaps, where they lacked data. So the LCAs, and then especially within the LCAs, the energy and carbon dioxide emission part was missing. And in many cases, the LCAs, it was very hard to understand where the starting point and the end point of the LCAs that has been done, if you could find LCAs, which makes it very hard to compare the different LCAs if you don't really know what the scope of the LCA is. And the sort of boundaries for the LCA. Apart from that, the environmental footprint, and with this I mean the sort of non-LCA part of the non-energy part, especially hazardous content. Can the different technologies remove or take care of hazardous contents within the plastics that should be recycled? And also the different solvents used. Several of the technologies use solvents in order to dissolve or within the reaction. Are those solvents hazardous? How are they taken care of? And what is the environmental and hazardous profile of these solvents? That's something also that was insufficient and lacking when the brands needed information. And of course, since the immature technologies, it's very hard to understand the performance. For example, what was the requirements for the input material? What was the total yield and the overall performance of the different technologies? And all of this insufficient data gaps or insufficient data made the comparison between these technologies very difficult. It made it difficult to compare them with the use of virgin material. It was very hard to compare it to mechanical recycling, and it was also hard to compare them within themselves, comparing the different set of technologies, for example, depolymerization with dissolution. So in total, the lack of information made it very hard for brands to understand the technologies in depth. So next slide, please. So the second topic raised by the brands in our survey was regarding physical connection. So I will give a brief overview of some concepts here in order to get an understanding. So within plastic recycling, and for several of the different technologies, different chain of custody models such as mass balance and book and claim are used. Mass balance is in short, where the recycled material or the plastic waste is mixed with virgin material. And the part of the output is therefore from recycled material, even if you cannot identify exactly which part. So it can be sold, a part of the material can be sold as 100% recycled material. But it's important here to remember that in many cases, or I would say almost in all cases, the input part is a very small amount. So we're talking about single-digit percentages of input material as coming from plastic waste. Book and claim is a certification of material. So you can buy a certificate, so you can use that on your material. Even though it's not recycled, you can have a certificate that the material is recycled because somewhere else that recycling has been done of a similar material, hopefully. And that means that the material and the product that you're selling will consist of 0% of recycled material. And especially within the mass balance concept, there is a physical connection. So brands are looking to understand what and follow the material flow within these processes, and that's where what we call the physical connection. We need to understand the boundaries of the system. Where does the material come in? What happens with the material? When is it mixed? And what is the output? And that's not always the case for these different methods, which means that the transparency of these material conversion schemes is very non-transparent. We don't have that much transparency, making it very hard for the brands to understand the different methods and the different technologies and what they mean regarding material requirements and material outputs. And the brands want to make the informed choices regarding the material that they buy, and they want to understand this, and they get the information from the suppliers. And it's very difficult to do that if you don't have all the information. And of course, the most important things for brands is to understand, does the material meet the requirements? And in this case, it's very hard because they don't have the information to do that. So next slide, please. Leaving the sort of more technical part a bit, I wanted to talk a bit about communication, which also was a very important issue raised by the brands in our study. As Teresa said, many brands are very ambitious and have both ambitious and important targets on material and recycled content. And of course, they need to communicate on these targets and how they are proceeding and what the progress and if they are achieving them or not. And within this discussion, the brands pointed out that the most important thing for them is honesty. They need to be honest and truthful towards their customers regarding what is in their material, in their products, what kind of material is it, and where do we have sourced that material. But they also need to be honest about the targets and their ambitions. Can they reach the target? What does their targets entail? And what is the progress towards reaching their targets? And of course, this is for the brands in order to avoid, for example, greenwashing. But then if they want to be able to communicate around this, it requires transparency in supply chain, as we mentioned before. Because if they don't know if the material meet their requirements for recycled content, for example, it's very hard for them to both communicate and understand if they are reaching the targets or if what is in their products. And this is, of course, also extremely important for the brands to understand and to know what they are talking about, not being dishonest towards either the customers or the consumers in this case. So next slide, please. And a closely related topic to communication is the 100% tag, which has been raised as very important within it. It's important to be able to sell products claiming to be 100% or made from 100% recycled material. And to clarify this, I need to be a bit more detailed regarding how some of the chain of custody models is working. So I will try to be a bit brief, but I will have to give some more details. So as I said before, mass balance material is usually sold as 100% recycled material. But now I will try to elaborate a bit on that because it's not entirely true. It's not made from 100% recycled material. So if we take an example, if we add 5 tons of plastic waste and mix that with 95 tons of virgin material. And remember, now I'm just giving examples, so please don't take these numbers as accurate and from a real process. And that means that we have 5 tons of recycled material, 95 tons of virgin material. So 5% of the output should be from recycled material, even if we cannot identify exactly where that 5% are. And if we just in this example say that the yield is 50%, that means that we will have 50 tons as the output, and we can take 5% of that, meaning 2.5 tons, and claim that that is made from 100% recycled material and sell it as 100% recycled material. But in reality, of course, it's only 5% of those, or that material only consists of 5% recycled material. So that is sort of the background to why the 100% tag has been extensively used. So the use of mass balance schemes encourage the use of the 100% tag. But as we said before, the brands want to be honest and not dishonest. And therefore, they are not very interested in material that says it's 100% recycled material when it's in reality made from 5% recycled material. So the most important things for the brands is that the tag is correct. If it's made from 35% recycled material, then it should be tagged made from 35% recycled material. If it's made from 70%, then it should be tagged 70% recycled material. So that's the important thing for the brands. And in summary, one can say that the process is sort of governing the material supply. The process encourages the 100% tag, but the brands thinks that is not what they want. So here we see a supply that's not really met with the demand. Next slide, please. So the final thing that I want to talk about is standards and certifications. And definitions of things like recycling and mass balance and book and claim, of course, exist because they haven't been used in other topics. But new is the context of plastic recycling or material recycling. But of course, there has been developed new standards within this by certifiers like Red Cert or ISCC Plus, for example. And in many cases, these new standards include, for example, mass balance, and in some cases, even book and claim. And in more detail, one can say that there is a sort of a gray zone of where gray zone of the understanding of the physical connection, or if there is a physical connection. And there is also a gray zone regarding the border of book and claim. For example, in some cases, internal book and claim can be used. That means that a company can use internal book and claim within a site or within a factory, or even within different sites in same country or similar. So that means that there is a fairly large gray zone within the certifications where things are allowed, or like mass balance or book and claim, and it's not really certain, and it's really sometimes a bit hard to understand where that border is. And one can say that the certifications has been defined from a producer view. As mentioned before, the process has sort of governed the standard and giving the rise to exactly why the standard looks like it is. So it's the process where mass balance is included, and internal book and claim and other types of book and claim can be done is included in the standard, because that has been sort of the way that the producers want to include and want this definition to look. Brands, on the other hand, thinks that the standards are way too loose in regards to both mass balance and is specifically regarding book and claim, which most brands don't want to buy material that is certified through book and claim schemes. And it's too loose also in the system boundaries and the understanding of the physical connections. It's very hard for brands to understand what has really happened with this material. What is the material flow? What is the input? What is the output? And what has happened between those 2 points? I would say that the most important thing that the brands have raised is also that there is a lack of diversification to encourage improvement, meaning that we now have a rather loose certification, meaning that it's quite simple to get the certified material. There is no steps, there is no progress. For example, if you want to show that you're not using mass balance, or you're using a specific type of plastic waste, or if you want to show that you're better, there is no room for improvement. We have a certified material, which is including a lot of the different chain of custody models, meaning that the brands, they really don't know what the certification means, and they have problems showing that they are doing good. They want to show that they are better than the other, and this is not included in the certification. So we need better clarity on what is included in the certifications, and we need more diversification of the different standards. And that was my last slide, so I will hand over to Teresa, who will give some conclusions.
Great, thank you, Jonathan, for that. And before I go through the conclusions, I want to again encourage you to write any questions you have in the Q&A box, and we'll try to answer them later. Great. So I will try to summarize a bit what Jonathan said and described in these conclusions. So the first thing I want to start with is the guiding documents. And there is a need for more balanced guiding documents. That's very clear. That also reflects the needs from brands. And this is especially true for the complex discussion on mass balance. We hope that this study can contribute to new white papers or other guiding documents made under the Ellen MacArthur Foundation umbrella or other organizations. And this study also clearly shows that most companies aim to reduce the use of plastics per product, but the absolute use is predicted to go up significantly because of increased sales. So this means that these brands want to fill this material increase with plastic, preferably from other sources. So the potential market for non-mechanical recycling material is big if the material fulfills the requirements of the brands. It's important to keep that in mind when discussing this. So for most brands with a higher level of knowledge, they have some kind of hierarchy of materials of waste, what they would prefer to buy, which is shown in the study. So the most preferable is mechanical recycling for clear, obvious reasons, while it has its limitations. So therefore, it is followed by dissolution and depolymerization. Very few brands that we talked to or had answering the survey that have a developed position on non-mechanical recycling regard pyrolysis or gasification as viable options, and therefore they rank them last in their hierarchy of desirable materials. The environmental impacts of the different non-mechanical recycling technologies are still highly uncertain, as Jonathan said, regarding both greenhouse gas emissions and chemicals and other issues. And without this information, it is not possible to properly evaluate if it is indeed a sustainable material. And the study shows that credible and honest communication is crucial for brands. So this means for most companies that took part in the study that they at least require a physical connection so that it's possible that the material contains recycled plastics. And for the same reason, most companies are not happy to accept elaborate mass balance schemes that allow for some type of credit transfer or in other ways do not accurately reflect the actual content of recycled material. So a few other brands that we talked to were more flexible, but only as a transitional solution. So they said that if this scheme is not abandoned in a few years, they will no longer accept the material. A very important conclusion from the study is that brands don't require material that they buy to be 100% recycled. They are happy with much less, as long as it's honest and correct. And this is important because it's often heard as a justification for the use of elaborate mass balance schemes. It's simply not the case. And then we come to the standards. The standards that are used today, for instance, ISCC+, can allow for credit transfer. And many companies want to rely on standards, but they see that as it is not strict enough, they have to come up with additional requirements themselves. This is something that we've seen, that they put on top of the certification. It would be very helpful if the standardization bodies would accommodate this better and include, for instance, physical connection as a requirement. So with this, I hope that we have given you a good overview of the study, and we now have some time for questions. So I wonder, Peter, have you been able to choose some questions for us? I see that we at least have some in the box.
Yes, I have, and here I am, Peter, with the important job of changing the slides and also reading the questions out loud. So thank you, Teresa. We have many questions here. One question comes from Heather McFarlane, who says that great presentation, very interesting. I agree with that. Did all the brands agree? Teresa, this is for you. Did all the brands agree on these points and have similar concerns? Or was there a range of views and different levels of interest on this issue?
On most things, of course, there was a diversity in the answers, but the ones that we highlighted the most were the ones where we found most consensus. And I would say that the accuracy part of it and the communication side is what we saw standing out the most, I think. And Jonathan, please correct me if you want to add something, but that is my view. Yes.
Great. And I don't hope I pronounce all the names right. We have from Shame Bible, who asked, are there any audited certification schemes that allow claims to be made on the percentage of recycled content at the product level with mass balance / book and claim chain of custody methods? Jonathan.
Yes, I can try to answer that question. I would say that most of the sort of schemes, the certification schemes, are based on how to certify material, not certifying products. So it's the use of certified materials, that's the aim. And as I said during the presentation, there is sort of a, I would say, rather loose definition of what means with recycled material and what can be included in that. I am not certain regarding if there are probably some certifications regarding product as well, but I don't think that they are that there are many today, and they are not really important. I think that the important ones are looking at the recycled material and how to achieve that, and not within the products. Okay,
I think this is kind of like a follow-up question from Edmar Melvisen, and it's also, I think, it's a bit, I mean, complicated. So I hope everyone follows along with this, but I guess there are a lot of people on this webinar who knows a lot of details about this. But for EPS foams, recycling is very common. We can use different methods in combination: mechanical recycling, dissolution, and chemical recycling. For that reason, the only way forward is applying credit method applied MB methodology. Do you support such approach if clearly communicated and certified, and in brackets, red cert?
Yep, I can try to answer this one as well. So I think that I am not in the specific details regarding the EPS foams, but if there is ways of doing recycling material, and if you have, I'm not really sure regarding I mean, if you have to use several different methodologies, and you consider mass balance as the only way forward. Of course, we think that, I mean, mass balance, we don't have a problem, so to say, with the concept of mass balance. What we want to achieve is then alignment between what the brands and what the brands need and their requirements on the material, and what the suppliers what kind of material the suppliers can supply. So if there is a market for a mass balanced material, of course, that's fine. For us, we think that it's important to find a user for recycled material, and this is what we want to achieve with the report. Of course, if it works, then we don't have a problem or an issue with mass balance as such.
Isn't it also, I mean, a little bit what that the issue is not really ours, but this report is also an effort to show the discrepancy between the brands and the suppliers, and that is really missing, right, Teresa?
Yes, I just want to fill in. I completely agree with you, Jonathan, in your explanation, and it kind of, it is a bit difficult to follow because it is a very complex discussion, and that kind of, it visualizes the whole problem of it, because if we say this is mass balance, it can mean a variety of things, and this is what's so difficult for many brands to understand. What does it really entail? Because it can entail a lot of different things. So what we have seen, just to clarify again, is that brands need mass balance to be applied as honest and accurate as possible. And one thing that we see is very important for this is that there is actually a physical connection, that is a very tangible thing to say. So, I mean, it is a complex, difficult discussion, and therefore the answers can be difficult to follow, but physical connection is something that we heard from so many brands is very important.
And if I may add just one more thing, that we also need to have transparency in these processes. The brands need to understand what is happening, if there is a physical connection or not. Sometimes that's hard to understand, even if there is a physical connection. So we need they need transparency to understand and make these choices, whether the material is according to their requirements or not.
But so Teresa, Thomas asks here, do you think that chemical companies should be obliged by the law to show the recycling content equal to the waste input in the process?
I think they can sell whatever material they like if it is within the law. But I think what is very important is to clarify what is, according to law, considered to be recycled content. So I would phrase it like that. I'd say that it is important that policymakers take this into consideration when deciding what do we actually, what do we include in what is meant by recycled content. And here we see that it is important to avoid greenwash, that these boundaries are set very clearly, so that companies can also adapt to this. So I say, you can sell whatever you like, but it is important that it is not used in a way that is not correct.
Jonathan, Katrin asks also a little bit of a clarification here. Did I understand it correct that the 100% tag means that the product is made out of 100% recycled feedstock? Or does it mean that the 100% of the product is made out of recycled material?
So if the intention was with the 100% tag was to show that for brands that tag is not really important. Regarding your question, that the 100% tag means that the material in the product is derived from 100% recycled content or recycled material. So that's what we mean when we say 100% tag.
And many times it is not. It is not. And that's the problem, right? Stefan says, thank you for the presentation. Do you have more information about the presence or not of controversial substances passing along from the waste, but also formed during the non-mechanical recycling processes?
Can I just start, and then I will leave over to you, Jonathan, who you have more technical knowledge. First of all, this is also a problem that always comes up in these discussions. It is not one single type of technology, and we need to talk about the different technologies differently, because they have different possibilities of cleaning. They have different possibilities of using chemicals in the process and the residues and so forth. So I think it is really important to differentiate the different technologies when we talk about this to start with, and then I will leave over to Jonathan.
Yeah, I think that's a great start. I think that it's very unclear regarding how the different technologies really can handle chemical content or hazardous substances within the plastic material. And I think, as I mentioned during the presentation, that I think this is one of the things that brands are really worry about. What happens with the chemical content, and how do they handle that? And but as Teresa said, it's very different depending on the techniques. As an example, I think one good example is the PFAS, which is a very common hazardous substance or hazardous substances within many different products. We don't really know what happens with PFAS. Even when you use pyrolysis, we don't really know if it's degrade or not and what happens with it, which means that if we're not certain that we can remove these hazardous substances from the plastic waste when we form new material, then we have the big risk of really just getting a bigger problem with recycled material that in many cases even accumulate hazardous substances during recycling. So I should say that this is one of the most important things, and I think one of the most important things that ChemSec talks a lot about regarding recycling, that we need to understand more regarding what the different technologies can do with chemical content, which they can, what they can handle or not.
I think continuing on this topic a little bit of hazardous chemicals in recycling, Matteo asked how to tackle the risks of recycling hazardous chemicals from the plastic waste during the recycling process. Are some non-mechanical processes preferable, or do some standards cover this risk?
I think that on a theoretical point of view, I would say that the thermal technologies should, in theory, be better at handling this because they degrade, in many cases, hazardous chemicals. But as I said just before, we don't really know about that. We're not really certain. We don't have the research to really back that up. So there are still uncertainties. Regarding the other types of technologies, I think there is it requires for each of the different cases, depending on what material you want to use, what solvent you're using, you need to really understand that and do your research for that specific case. So it's in many cases a way of a case-by-case study in order to understand that specific process and how that handle different chemical content.
Okay, so another question here from Meike Flock to you, Teresa. So, help me understand how the Consumer Goods Forum just published a paper of various brands that pledge for pyrolysis. And here you say that the brands in our study, some participated in both, are not interested in it. So it's a bit of mixed opinions there. How come this?
I think, you know, I can't comment on that particular paper, and I haven't been part of that. This is the findings that we have from this study, but it depends very much what type of company you are and what type of plastic you use. And Jonathan will be much better at explaining this, I'm sure, but some companies are very reliant on what we call the polyolefins that cannot be dealt with in non-mechanical recycling technologies, apart from pyrolysis or gasification. So if you are limiting what you do to the polyolefins, this is the only option you have today when it comes to non-mechanical recycling. So I guess the options are not very many if you want a different feedstock. This is one of the only options you have, except for virgin or bio-based. And please, Jonathan, correct me here if I'm wrong, but this would be my explanation of this.
I would say that I completely agree with you. So I think you put it very good.
Okay, great. Moving on. And here we have Karine van Dorseler, who probably sounds like she works for us. She writes, the most important is that the recycled material does not contain hazardous chemicals. In the circular economy, the materials will be recycled over and over again. And yes, we agree with that. That's not really a question, but you can come work for us. Just send us your application afterwards, Karina. Ewan Chesnow, he says, the starting point is that mass balance is unclear for the brands, and yet the conclusion is already that mass balance is not sustainable.
No, thank you for asking that question, because that tells me that I haven't been very clear enough. What we say is that the very elaborate application of mass balance schemes, where you allocate credits, maybe internally within your company, that is not considered sustainable in the study that we have done, according to the brands that we talked to. Not all of them, but the majority of them, definitely. So mass balance, as I said, is a scale. And we agree that the use of mass balance as such, there is nothing wrong with that. And I understand why you need to do that. But there are so many levels of doing that. And it's the very elaborate ways of applying it that becomes problematic for brands.
Yeah. Do you want to add, Jonathan, or should I move on?
I know, I think Teresa put it well, so
yeah, I think we're moving up on the finishing time. We have many questions still. Should I move on for a couple of more minutes?
Yeah, we can take a few more questions, I think.
Shania, sorry for that, Shania Banks. Have you heard from brands about how they handle hazardous chemicals in plastic waste? That is one of our concerns, the level of contamination in post-consumer recycled content.
And to be very clear, this was not part of this study. Of course, we have a lot of discussion with brands about both the input chemicals and what the products do when they become waste. And for truly ambitious companies, this means taking responsibility both with the input and with the output. This means producing products that do not contain hazardous substances as much as possible, regardless of what type of material you use. And this is what I said in the beginning of my presentation, that these companies are not willing to lower the standards on the input material just because it comes from recycling. So they need to be sure that it doesn't contain unwanted substances that they have, for instance, on their MRSL lists. Yes.
Delphine Klaus asks Teresa, were the regulatory barriers and the need for changes in the current EU policies ever mentioned?
I think for most brands, these policy procedures that are right now developing is very complex, and most brands are not involved in that like we are, unfortunately, I would say, because I think it would help the discussion. So I think in general, I would unfortunately say that they don't really see that.
Okay. Shania Banks asked, will the report be shared with webinar participants? It's on our website since 2 or 3 weeks back. So please go to our website, chemsec.org, and you will find it there and lots of other interesting stuff.
I also inserted a link in the PowerPoint presentation.
Great. How to ensure traceability between mechanical recycling outputs, flakes of good purity for pyrolysis, and free allocation / credit systems used for chemical recycling? Jonathan.
Thank you, Peter. I'm not entirely sure. I will try to answer it. And if I'm not understanding the question, you can try to clarify it. I mean, traceability is very important. And I think when we talk about mechanical recycling, that's quite straightforward. I think this question aims at when we combine mechanical recycling and use that in combination with chemical recycling. I think that, I mean, of course, we need to have traceability of the material, of where it comes from and what the content is. And then, of course, we need to have that for the chemical recycling part, or the non-mechanical recycling part, maybe I should say. But I'm not really certain of if there is an issue depending on when you do a combination or if there's not. I would say that if you keep the two processes separate and the two parts separate, then you should be able to have traceability.
Okay. Then we have our old friend Stephen Fuller, who tries to do a little bit of commercial for his own product here. TCO Certified Edge is a product certification that verifies a minimum of 85% post-recycled content calculated from the total weight of plastic used in the product. So I gave you that one for free, Stephen. Moving on. There should be the difference in the definition. Recycled content for mechanical recycled plastic and recycled feedstock for recycling processes based on chemical reactions, because it is a big difference regarding quality and hazardous substances. What do you say about this statement?
I can start. I'm not sure if I will answer the question entirely, but I think it's a noteworthy thought, because this mass balance approach and credit transfer, it should also be possible to apply on mechanical recycling in theory, which would really mean that if I had a company for mechanical recycling, but on the same site had a factory producing virgin plastic, I would be able to recycle the mechanically recycled material and allocate the credits to the virgin plastic, sell it as recycled while it contains no recycled material. So I think, you know, this kind of sets it in perspective that they are indeed very different, but it more shows the absurdity of it.
Atashi Bell asks, it is scientifically well understood that the downside of mechanical recycling is the limited number of times it can be employed and the limited scope of plastics that can be recycled before the integrity of the material is beyond use. It then would end up in incineration or landfill. With that in mind, do you see chemical recycling as superior or inferior to mechanical recycling?
Jonathan, could you start, and then maybe I can fill in?
Yep, I can start. So I don't think that we should sort of rank them as inferior or not. I think that they are complementary. Sometimes, of course, we think that, I mean, if you can do mechanical recycling and make sure that you keep track of the chemical content, mechanical recycling is preferable. But as you say, there are a few drawbacks with that, meaning the quality and also the chemical. If there is chemical content, it's very hard to deal with that with mechanical recycling. So I think that we definitely should see mechanical recycling and non-mechanical recycling as complementary. And for some material, we need non-mechanical recycling. And for some material, or hopefully for many materials, we can use mechanical recycling as the primary way to recycle. But I wouldn't say that one is inferior to the other, but more they are complementary.
Yes, and I would also add a little bit to that. that when we have the non-mechanical recycling methods, like Jonathan mentioned, it is very rare that you end up with 100% waste coming in and 100% waste, 100% pure product coming out. So what we deal with is a final product that maybe contains of 30% from recycled feedstock and the rest from virgin, or even much less than that. So of course we cannot rank them, but this needs to be kept in mind when we compare the two.
Okay.
Do you have anything to add to that thought, or are you happy?
I'm happy.
Okay, great.
So we're running a bit of on overtime here. We still have many questions, but we need to end here. Maybe you want to say a couple of closing words, Teresa?
Yes, that'd be great. Thank you so much, Peter, for selecting these questions. I know it's difficult as it's quite a technical issue. And I hope that you are happy with the presentations that we did and that we tried to answer your questions. We will have a look at the questions afterwards, the ones we didn't have time to answer also. I hope you can inspire us for our further work. And we are always happy to be in contact with you if you have further questions or discussions you want to raise with us. So I want to thank you, Peter, for helping us, and special thanks to you, Jonathan, for the presentation today. So thank you everyone for listening, and see you next time.